This is Wretched Radio with Todd Friel.
This is Wretched Radio. Thank you very much. Anybody feeling like they should be wearing bell bottoms? With a voice like butter, this is Wretched Radio. We've only just begun with the stories from a BuzzFeed of all places. An article on the New Apostolic Reformation movement, courtesy of Bethel Church, the supernatural school of shenanigans and tricks and parlor games, where they teach the kids how to supposedly heal people, or they teach them how to hear a word from God and then speak it into somebody's life. The overwhelming majority, Mike Bickle from IHOP himself said, most of them are just plain wrong. Does that sound like it's from God? I think Mike Bickle said it was about 85% of all prophecies, to the best of his knowledge, are wrong. Now, he doesn't have a study on that. I think the number is higher because they don't hear from God. Does God sound like a 15% of the time kind of God to you? Is that really how he gives messages to people today? So unable to help people. You can't substantiate, you can't determine whether that they are true or not. This is a system that is hurting people, and I believe it is incumbent upon us to warn as many as we possibly can in our circles, because I'm telling you, the kids are drawn to this like moths to a flame. The kids love this, and so it is a BuzzFeed reader with a bum knee visited the Supernatural School of Healing to check it out. And the stories that came from there should shock us. When I ask about Bethel, she writes, most Redding, California residents who are opposed to the church return to the same story from nearly a decade ago. In 2008, a group of Bethel students were drinking at the top of a cliff on the banks of the Sacramento River when one man fell to the bottom of the 200-foot cliff. His classmates didn't call the police. Instead, they tried to climb down so they could faith heal him. Kid was paralyzed. For one local man, an evangelical Christian, it was time that a BSSM student he had trusted to babysit his children called while he was at dinner with his wife to say the Antichrist was in their home and that the sitter's own closet was filled with demons that needed to be exorcised. Hold on. Now, there's a story about Bethel students swarming an elderly woman in a wheelchair in a parking lot and encouraging her to walk. Then she lists a litany of these stories that she heard on the streets. Now, I grant you, these are anecdotes. These people could have been lying. I've heard it from very reliable sources. This is precisely what happens there. People on their way to dental appointments, shopping trips, interrupted by Bethel students on their treasure hunts. The biggest local tourist attraction, the Sundial Bridge, was briefly, quote, ruined, complained residents, by students looking to practice their prophecy on the banks of the river, and now they're no longer allowed to prophesy to tourists around the bridge, even though the government accepts a lot of their money. Donna Zibel, who's lived in Redding for more than 40 years, said her 15-year-old grandson was walking home from a friend's house on a cold January afternoon when he had an asthma attack in the street a few blocks from his home. It was Bethel churchgoers, she says, who found him and ran to his side. As he gasped for breath, they called 911. Sorry, that's not what they did. They began to pray for healing, letting long minutes tick by without calling 911. One woman even ran back into her friend's house to get a copy of her Bible. Eventually, someone in the group called an ambulance. The boy was taken to the hospital 15 minutes after the attack began. For days, he was in the ICU of Shasta Regional Medical Center with irreparable brain damage. Bethel Church members and leaders came to the hospital asking to pray over her grandson. They gave her daughter a piece of prophetic art, a drawing they said had been made by a Bethel child. They started praying and talking in tongues, she said. They were going to blow a shofar horn. That's big. They were giving these prophecies about he was going to be raised from the dead. They promised over and over that God could bring her son back to life. And it was to the daughter. the son would come back to life. They said there was going to be a miracle. They gave my daughter false hope, said Grandma. He died 4 days later. You see, false movements hurt people. This movement is breaking up good Christian families, swiping our evangelical youth away in droves. Do not be deceived. This is going on talk to a few people in your church. Ask them. I know I hear from them regularly. Anytime I talk about this subject someplace, people simply queue up to say, yep, that was me. Yep, my son. Yep, my daughter. Yep, the neighbor. Yep, from our the whole church went. This is everywhere, man. The stories continue. She's now at the conference. A man named Sean Boltz. Joey, that's one of your favorite prophesiers, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, the cell phone prophet.
The cell phone prophet who looks at his cell phone while making prophecies. I'm sure he's not being fed information. After all, these kids who register and have to pay money to come to this school, I'm sure they don't have access to their Facebook page to find out any information on the kids to concoct some sort of prophecy. I'm sure they would never do something that underhanded. Sean Boltz is presented at the conference. He says he had a testimony for someone named Judah, who is somehow related to Judges. A boy pops up, beaming in the crowd. He says his name is Judah, and he lives on Judges Road, because I'm sure that was not on the application form. The prophet knows that Judah has an older brother, Ryan, something like that. And he's horrible at this. Joey, do you have any of the footage of this guy? He's just awful at it. I think that there's somebody that I'm looking at on I don't know, it's a TV or it's a computer screen, and he's vaping or smoking, or he's got something coming out of his lungs right now. And do I sense that he's, I don't know, Protestant, maybe Methodist or Lutheran or something like that? Am I getting near? That's how, Joey, you got some of him?
You're close.
Go ahead.
You're close.
Hit it with Sean. Oh, I've got to find it? Oh, now I've got to do work. Nobody told me that radio would involve pushing buttons and doing work. All right, this is what the fellow sounds like right here. It's just a joke.
Is there, I don't know, I don't get this, but a joy from Germany?
Who would have known that a joy from Germany? I don't know. Is it Boltz asked.
Well, that's not bad, though, because really, how much joy is there in Germany?
Well, if they do have it, they certainly don't show it. Of course,
Germany.
They do rejoice when they take over a nation, but that is a history. Boltz knows the Brian or Ryan or something like that. Boltz asks if there's a girl named Luna in the audience. Of course, there is, because he has access to the registration cards. He tells her he's had a vision of a Boston Terrier, the same kind of dog Luna says her sister is adopting next month. Boltz asks if her name is Alfredo, and if the names Alfredo and Antonio mean anything to her. Those are my cousins. They're twins, she cries, with a look of awe on her face. And she starts to talk again, and it sounds like she's trying to qualify her answer. Well, it's not, she starts, but the crowd of young people has erupted in a roar of amazement. Luna's voice is drowned out. That is what is going on. But there's one last story, and this is telling. Finally, writes the author, it's my turn. I can tell I'm a tough case because a third healer comes over to us, then a fourth. Soon I'm surrounded by people praying for my knee. One woman has her hand on my shoulder, another on her knees in front of me, and the force of their expectation, desperation almost, is palpable. Unrelentingly, every few minutes they ask, how are you feeling? Is your knee better? I try to deflect some of their questions, but it doesn't work. When one healer asks me what I feel, I tell her I feel your energy and prayers. She responds, but what about your knee? Well, it's a pretty serious injury, so I think it might take some time. Time, says the healer. Jesus didn't need time. Exactly. Keep that in mind. Jesus can heal you right away. So they start praying again, and I start to feel a little desperate, like I'm never going to get out of there. So the next time they ask me how my knee feels, I lie. I think it's more flexible now. You don't suppose that type of peer pressure ever happens at one of these conventions that you see on TV. Yeah, my back, it's better. I think it's more flexible now, I say. I move it back and forth, and I can see my healer's eyes light up. I think it's getting better, thank you. They begin to cry. A week later, I'm back in New York. I'm on my physical therapist's table, face down. All right, let's see how you're doing, she says. Before I left for Reading, I told her where I was headed and why. And she joked, maybe you're healed. Well, during the trip, I had a lot of time to do rest and exercises. The doctor was impressed that it can now move an extra 20 degrees. I squeeze my eyes shut, and I think, maybe, just for a split second. That's how the deception happens. She had rest on her knee. She did some exercise. It's not fully healed. She can't do jumping jacks, but it's moving 20%. But hey, maybe it did. And that's how they work. Hopeful, gullible people lured into the new apostolic Reformation movement. Do not let it happen to your children. And until tomorrow, go serve your king. Thank you very much for watching one segment. You can listen to 3 more, well, if you can stomach it, for free at wretched.org, iTunes, Android, whatever your listening device is. If you have a plate in your head, you can pick up the program from anywhere around the world, thanks to the ongoing monthly support of our gospel partners. Should you be one of the people who has listened to the program for an extended period of time, meaning more than once, would you please consider becoming a gospel partner so we can continue to proclaim the good news of the gospel? Simply visit wretched.org.